Hello everyone, this is the Smiley Group's presentation. Our presentation is focused on the topic of an inclusive school environment for LGBTQ plus identifying students. This is our slide with our group member roles. We have the editor, the initial researcher, the additional researcher, point of view number 1, point of view number 2, and point of view number 3. LGBTQ plus is an initialism that stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, transsexual, queer, fluid, questioning, intersex, asexual, ally, and pansexual. The term has evolved as more identities have come to become recognized and used by members of this community. However, the first term, LGBT, began to be used around the 1980s. There is an extremely long history of struggles and resistance for the LGBTQ plus identifying community. For example, there are the Stonewall riots that have marked the history of this community after a fight for radical change for homosexual rights. These riots were specifically against brutality and discrimination of the police in New York and was what sparked more people to fight against injustices towards this community. Nonetheless, many of this community's struggles and constant resistance towards discrimination has been in educational institutions. There are three main points of view when there are conversations about providing the necessary resources and inclusive spaces for LGBTQ plus identifying students at schools. There is the side that is all against LGBTQ plus rights, those that are for it but not completely, and those who are all in to support LGBTQ plus rights at schools. The first point that we will be looking at is the viewpoint that is against LGBTQ plus inclusive spaces at schools. So many people in this category tend to be unable to realize that the LGBTQ plus identifying people is the same people with the same personality and charisma. The only difference is their sexual orientation and sometimes even their looks. Some factors of why many are not accepting to LGBTQ plus identifying people are due to religious reasons and cultural norms. Those who are unable to accept due to religious reasons are because their beliefs are based on the idea that an individual should stay the gender or sex that they were born with and given. When we see this in the educational setting, it becomes prevalent amongst Catholic and or private schools. In these types of schools, there is commonly not much support for LGBTQ plus identifying students. Cultural norms serve as another reason of non-acceptance to LGBTQ plus identifying students. Therefore, the culture of peers might impact their ability to accept the fact of having a friend who identifies as LGBTQ plus. Also, as you can see in the map, there are currently laws established in certain states like Texas, Oklahoma, Arizona, and others that prohibit the promotion of homosexuality in schools. In other words, any talk about the LGBTQ plus community and their rights is banned from the curriculum or any talk made in the educational setting. A common issue that challenges the acceptance of LGBTQ plus inclusive school environments comes when deciding on restrooms and locker rooms. There are typically only male and female restrooms and locker rooms, and they only allow those of the same sex to be in the one that corresponds. Sadly, it is hard to make these types of changes and have more restrooms and locker rooms that are inclusive because there are no funds of schools to be able to provide accommodations of making these gender inclusive spaces. However, we will later look and see how the inability of having these spaces impacts students. Then we have our middle section, which is a viewpoint that supports but doesn't support completely, also known as the yes but no. For this section, our partner group member has decided to submit it separately because of her inability to turn in her work on time, so this section will be turned in by her separately. So now we will have our yes section. So this section focuses on the viewpoint of those who are completely for having an LGBTQ plus inclusive space or spaces at educational settings. So people who are proponents for LGBTQ plus inclusion in schools believe it matters because although public support for same-sex marriages grew by 20% in the last 10 years, many LGBTQ plus identifying people, in particular transgender, still feel some sort of negativity. Various surveys and research done show that students are more at risk of mental health issues such as depression and suicidal tendencies or thoughts. One educator, Michelle Page, agrees that most teachers believe that schools and education are for everyone, regardless of ethnicity, gender, or gender identity. With that said, teachers are also aware that not all students are having the experiences they wish for them. According to the recent surveys and research, students who identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community have reported feeling less safe and respected. Therefore, their motivation for education is significantly lower than those who do not identify as LGBTQ plus. Another proponent of inclusion of LGBTQ plus, such as Professor Michael Sadowski, says that we need to create more schools that affirm LGBTQ plus students and integrate respect for LGBTQ plus identities through multiple aspects of school life. Students should be able to reach out to a staff that is supportive and understanding, as well as be able to have access to GSAs, also known as Gay Straight Alliances, or other similar clubs that provide support and have these inclusive spaces. Going along with what professional academics in the educational field say, like Professor Sadowski, we can see here in this chart, which is a National School Climate Survey that was done a couple years ago. We can see how students tend to feel in the school climate as a way to demonstrate the importance of having more spaces to be inclusive of the LGBTQ plus identifying community and the educational setting. So here we're able to see the percentages of where students tend to feel unsafe or uncomfortable on educational settings. You can see that bathrooms are at the top, locker rooms as well. Then it comes to PE, facilities, cafeterias, hallways, etc. But in reality, like before, it's mostly bathrooms and locker rooms that should, change. Their atmosphere should change, considering the viewpoint that we're looking at right now. The HRC and NASSP, which are the Human Rights Campaign and the National Association of Secondary School Principals, are teamed up to ensure equal education for all LGBTQ plus identifying students. So these are two groups that are highly for having LGBTQ plus inclusive spaces, and they are some of the reasons why the viewpoint of being totally for this LGBTQ plus inclusivity has grown. So they are focusing on safety and inclusion for these students in the educational setting. In the HRC's 208 LGBTQ plus youth report, they found that only 26% of students feel safe in the classrooms and only 5% believe their teachers and staff are supportive of them. With a large number of educators, almost 83%, believing that they need to provide a safe classroom for LGBTQ plus students, but only having half take action, it really shows how there needs to be a lot of understanding of these students. The NASSP has stated that school educators and principals must provide an affirming environment where each student is treated fairly, respectfully, and with an understanding of each student's culture and context. Together, through various webinars and even an event on Capitol Hill, they are trying to achieve the safe place for every LGBTQ plus student in schools. With more policies being passed and more laws becoming accepting of these members, there has been done much more understanding for LGBTQ plus identifying students. Yet there is still a lot to be done to ensure that all LGBTQ plus identifying students have inclusive school environments. That is it. Those are our 3 viewpoints that we had. Here are a couple of references that we used to ensure that our report and our viewpoints were very clear. And that is it. Thank you for watching.